What color is this? Most people would say blue, but if you ask people around the world, that answer isn't always the same. In some languages, blue and green are considered the same color. In others, there are multiple completely different words for what English speakers just call blue. For a long time, scientists thought color categories were basically random, that every culture just picked a few colors from the spectrum and called it a day. But it turns out that's not quite true. Across cultures that have never interacted, humans tend to group colors in strangely similar ways, which raises an important question. If color perception is partly universal, why do colors still feel so personal? Why does red feel stressful during a test? Why does blue feel calm, and yellow somehow feel like a math class? And even inside the same high school, where people share similar culture, media, and an environment, people still disagree about what colors mean. So I wanted to find out, how do high school students actually perceive and emotionally interpret colors? The idea that people might see colors differently isn't new. In the 1800s, a British scholar named William Gladstone made a strange observation while studying the ancient Greek epic, the Odyssey. The poem constantly describes the ocean as the wine-dark sea, which is odd, because the sea obviously isn't the color of wine. Gladstone noticed something even stranger. Across thousands of lines of poem, there are almost no clear references to the color blue. Instead, the poet uses words like bronze, purple, wine dark, or simply dark to describe things we would normally call blue. So Gladstone proposed a surprising theory. Maybe the ancient Greeks literally couldn't perceive blue the way we do. In other words, he suggested that they might have been partially colorblind. Later researchers began testing this idea in other cultures. Anthropologist W.H.R. Rivers studied communities in places like Papua New Guinea and found that some languages had only a few basic color words, sometimes just red, white, and black. At the time, some scholars interpreted this as evidence that these cultures had less developed color perception, but today we know that explanation was wrong. The issue wasn't that these people couldn't see the colors, it was that their languages categorized them differently, and that realization helped inspire a new generation of research into how humans organize the color spectrum. For centuries, scientists debated whether color categories were biological or cultural, but in the 1960s, anthropologists Paul Kay and Brent Berlin decided to test this idea. They studied color words across many different languages, and they discovered something very interesting. Languages didn't pick color categories randomly. Instead, they tended to develop them in predictable stages. If a language only had 3 colors, they were almost always black or dark, white or light, and red. If a language had 4, the next color was usually yellow or green, then blue appeared, and only later did languages add colors like brown, purple, pink, or orange. Even cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years of history followed similar patterns, which suggested that something deeper might be shaping how humans divide the color spectrum. To test this idea further, researchers launched something called the World Color Survey. They showed people from 110 different cultures a set of 330 color chips. Each participant was asked a simple question: what do you call this color? When researchers mapped the answers, something strange appeared. Color categories across languages clustered in almost the same places, even in cultures that had no contact with each other. So maybe color categories weren't random after all. A later study done by Regier, Kay, and Catterpole offered an explanation. Their idea was that color naming reflects something called an optimal partition of perceptual space. That sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Imagine every color humans can see placed inside a 3-dimensional map called the C-Lab color space. In this map, the distance between 2 colors corresponds to how different they look to the human eye. Researchers treated color naming like a math problem. The goal was to divide this color space in a way that makes communication efficient. That means colors in the same category should look similar, and colors in different categories should look very different. When a computer calculated the most efficient way to divide color space, the result looked almost identical to real human languages. This suggests that our brains may naturally organize color in ways that make communication easier. But that still leaves another question. Even if humans tend to categorize colors in similar ways, why do they feel so different emotionally? Why does red feel stressful? Why does blue feel calming? And if color perception is partly universal, what happens inside a community where people share a very similar culture? To explore that question, I ran a small study at my own school. I created a survey asking students how they perceive and interpret different colors. The survey focused on 3 things. First, emotional associations. How do specific colors make people feel? Second, symbolic associations. What colors do students connect to things like school subjects, authority, or creativity? And third, categorization. How do people classify ambiguous colors like teal or dark purple where there isn't a clear answer? The idea was to see whether students in a shared social environment would interpret colors in similar ways, or whether personal experiences would still create differences. More than 90 students responded to the survey, and some patterns were immediately clear. When students were asked what emotion they associate with blue, the most common answer was calm, but the second most common answer was sadness. The same color carried two completely different emotional meanings. For red, the responses were much stronger. Most students associated red with anger, danger, or stress. When asked which color felt the most energetic, yellow dominated the responses by a large margin. Students also associated certain colors with school subjects. Many respondents linked math with colors like red or black, while English and history often appeared as warmer or more neutral colors. These answers suggest that emotional associations may come from personal experiences with those subjects. When students were asked what color represents authority, the most common answer was black. For freedom, the most common answers were white, blue, and green. But perhaps the most interesting result came from a simple question. Do you think colors affect your mood? Out of more than 90 responses, only 3 people said no. The survey suggests something interesting. Even within a relatively homogeneous environment, people still develop slightly different emotional meanings for colors. Some patterns appear shared, likely influenced by culture, school experiences, and media. But others vary depending on personal experience, which fits with what modern research says about color perception. Biology shapes how we see color, but experience shapes what color means. Humans have evolved to see color in a very specific way. Our eyes detect wavelengths of light, our brains organize them into categories, and language gives those categories names. So, what color is this? Most of us would say blue, and biologically we are probably seeing something very similar. But what color means to us is a very different story, because color isn't just light hitting your eyes. It's memories, it's school, it's culture, it's emotions, it's the thousands of experiences that slowly shape how we interpret the world around us. So, when 2 people look at the same color, their eyes might see the same light, but their minds might see something completely different, which means the answer to the original question, do we actually see colors the same way? Kind of, but not entirely. And maybe that's what makes perception so interesting, because sometimes understanding the world starts with simply thinking out loud.